pale dawn spreads across the calm waters of the Black Sea. Light moves slowly across the surface, revealing quiet ripples that drift toward a low stretch of shoreline. From above, the coast appears peaceful, sand, grass, and shallow water merging gently into the horizon. Yet beneath this still surface lies a hidden extension of an ancient city. Stone walls rest beneath the water. Fragments of harbor structures lie buried in sand. Foundations stretch outward from the shoreline into the shallow sea, marking where streets and docks once stood above the tide. This place is Phanagoria. And the question that lingers here is simple, yet strangely powerful. How could a thriving coastal city, built to face the open waters of the Black Sea, slowly lose entire districts to the sea itself? Phanagoria stands on the Taman Peninsula, a low stretch of land between the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. Even today, the terrain feels exposed to wind and water. The shoreline curves gently around shallow bays, and the land rises only slightly above sea level. In landscapes like this, the boundary between land and sea is never entirely fixed. Storms reshape beaches, waves move sand along the coast. Over centuries, the shoreline can drift inward or outward by surprising distances. The sea advances slowly, sometimes by only a few inches each year, yet time transforms those small changes into entire shifts of landscape. Long ago, Phanagoria was positioned directly along this restless edge. The city faced a protected harbor that connected inland routes with maritime trade across the Black Sea. Ships approaching from the open water would have seen a shoreline marked by quays, warehouses, and stone-built harbor structures extending along the coast. The harbor was the city's threshold between land and sea. From these docks, goods moved between ships and the inland settlements of the surrounding plains. The harbor connected distant regions through water routes that stretched across the Black Sea basin. But coastlines like this are always temporary. The sea slowly reshapes them. And over centuries, the same waters that once sustained the harbor of Phanagoria began to reclaim parts of the city itself, quietly carrying sections of its shoreline beneath the waves. The coastline around Phanagoria has never been a fixed boundary. Wind moves across the water, pushing waves toward the shore. Storms reshape the beaches. Currents carry sand along the edge of the peninsula, building new ridges while quietly eroding others. Over long stretches of time, these small movements transform the entire coastline. When the harbor of Phanagoria first developed, the shoreline extended farther into the Black Sea than it does today. The city's waterfront stood on ground that was stable enough to support quays, stone embankments, and docking areas where vessels could approach the shore. From the harbor, ships moved outward across the sea, linking the city to distant coastal regions. The Black Sea was not a barrier, but a corridor, connecting ports scattered across its wide basin. Through this maritime network, goods and materials traveled between distant landscapes. To support this activity, the waterfront of Phanagoria was carefully shaped. Stone blocks reinforced sections of the shoreline. Harbor structures projected outward into shallow water, creating protected docking areas where vessels could approach without running aground. Walkways and working platforms connected the quays to the city streets, rising slightly above the harbor zone. The design balanced land and sea. Structures were positioned close enough to the water for easy access, yet elevated just enough to remain dry during normal tides and seasonal storms. In calm conditions, the harbor would have appeared orderly and stable, rows of stone blocks forming the edge of the city, boats resting quietly beside the docks. But the Black Sea is not entirely calm across centuries. Coastal landscapes respond slowly to wind patterns, storm surges, and the gradual movement of sediment along the shore. Over time, waves remove sand from some areas while depositing it elsewhere. Beaches retreat. Cliffs soften. Low shorelines begin to sink or erode. These changes are rarely sudden. Instead, the waterline creeps forward little by little. At Phanagoria, the shoreline gradually shifted toward the city. Sections of the harbor that once stood above the waterline began to sit closer to the tide. Waves reached farther inland during storms. Sand and sediment moved across the docks. The harbor still functioned for a time, but the boundary between land and sea was slowly beginning to move. The transformation of Phanagoria's shoreline did not happen in a single moment. There was no sudden collapse of walls or dramatic wave that carried the harbor away. Instead, the change unfolded quietly across generations, shaped by the steady rhythm of water and wind. At first, the shifts may have seemed minor. During storms, waves reached farther along the docks than before. Sections of the waterfront remained damp after the water receded. Sand began to gather around the edges of stone embankments that once stood clearly above the tide. These small signs suggested something subtle but important. The sea was slowly moving inland. As the shoreline changed, parts of the harbor infrastructure were forced closer to the water. Quays that once bordered dry ground began to stand directly at the edge of the tide. Walkways that had been safely above the waves now faced regular flooding during strong winds. The city still faced the sea, but the balance between land and water was shifting. Over time, erosion removed sections of the coastline that had once supported buildings near the harbor. Loose sediment beneath the shore weakened the foundations of waterfront structures. Where waves struck most strongly, the ground softened and slowly gave way. Stone blocks that had once formed the edge of the harbor began to slip downward. Some structures tilted as their supporting soil eroded. Others collapsed partially into shallow water, their foundations settling into the seabed. Storm after storm carried additional sand across the ruins, burying parts of the harbor beneath layers of sediment. Yet this burial had an unexpected effect. The same sand that covered the structures also helped preserve them. Without constant exposure to air and waves, many sections of the harbor remained sealed beneath the seabed. Walls, foundations, and stone pavements rested quietly beneath the water, protected by the sediment that concealed them. Gradually, the sea claimed more of the old waterfront. Where streets once led toward the harbor, shallow water now extended inland. Sections of the ancient city that once stood beside the docks slipped beyond the shoreline entirely. The harbor did not vanish. It simply moved beneath the surface. Centuries passed, and the shoreline of the Taman Peninsula continued its slow transformation. Wind pushed waves across the shallow bays of the Black Sea. Sand moved steadily along the coast, building new ridges while wearing away older ground. Storms occasionally reshaped the beaches, but the deeper change came from time itself. Little by little, the sea advanced across the ancient harbor district of Phanagoria. Above the surface, the city continued to exist on land nearby. But along the water's edge, the original shoreline had shifted. Areas that once formed the working port of the city gradually slipped beneath the tide. Today, when the sea is calm, the outlines of this submerged quarter can still be traced beneath the water. Divers exploring the seabed encounter stone blocks arranged in straight lines. Sections of pavement remain visible beneath layers of sand. The foundations of harbor structures extend outward from the modern shoreline, revealing where quays and docks once stood above the waves. These remains form a quiet underwater landscape. What lies beneath the Black Sea is not scattered debris, but the organized edge of a once active port. Walls and platforms still follow the geometry of a city designed to meet the water. The harbor district, though partially submerged, retains the structure it held centuries ago. The sea did not erase Phanagoria's harbor. It preserved it in a different form. And so the original question returns: how could an entire section of a coastal city disappear beneath the sea while the rest of the settlement remained above it? The answer lies in the nature of coastlines. Unlike mountains or stone plateaus, shorelines are constantly shifting. Waves move sediment along the coast. Storms reshape beaches. Rising water levels and gradual erosion can slowly redraw the boundary between land and sea. Phanagoria was built directly on that boundary. When the shoreline changed, the harbor that once stood beside open water gradually found itself beneath it. Today, the Black Sea moves quietly above the ancient docks. Light filters through shallow water and settles across buried stones. The harbor remains there, silent, submerged, and preserved beneath the tide. Phanagoria endures as a city divided between land and sea. Part of it still rises above the peninsula. Another part rests beneath the water, where the old shoreline once met the harbor, and the sea continues its slow work along the coast, shaping the same boundary that once defined the life of the city. If this quiet journey beneath the waters of Phanagoria stayed with you, you may wish to continue exploring these ancient landscapes. And what do you think shapes coastal cities more over time? Human design or the slow movement of the sea.